Good morning. Good morning.
We are learning Mishnah Sotah, Perek Zayin, Chapter 7, Mishnah Ches, Mishnah 8. So the next topic to be discussed is with the mitzvah of Hakel, which we read a few weeks ago, which is where the Jewish people all, typically on the three regalim, Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkot, it's the men that are obligated to be there. And when it comes to what we're about to read, which happens during Sukkot, everyone's supposed to be there. Men, women, children. So and this is one of the things mentioned before, Parashas Hamelach, the portion that the king reads. There was a special reading that the king of the Jewish people would read. And the Mishnah now says, Parashas Hamelach Ketzad. The king's reading, the section that the king read, how is this done? How is this performed? So the first thing the Mishnah tells us is when it took place. Moitzei Yom Tov Harishin Shel Chag. After the first day of Sukkot. Let's remember in Eretz Yisrael, there, and especially in times of the Beis HaMikdash, well, in Eretz Yisrael, there's 1 day of Yom Tov, right? So the first day of Yom Tov, first day is 1 day of Sukkot. Sukkot is referred to the Mishnah as Chag, festival. And Mishnah says, Moitzei Yom Tov Harishin, at the end of the first Yom Tov of Sukkot, because we have a first Yom Tov and a later Yom Tov, which is Shmini Atzeres. But here it's talking about what we say after the first day of Yom Tov. B'Shmini b'Motzei Shvius. In the eighth year, at the end of the Shemitah. Every 7 years, there is a Shemitah year in Eretz Yisrael. Shemitah year being the year that the land is not worked. Now this is after Shemitah had ended. Shemitah begins and ends in Tishrei, on Rosh Hashanah. And when Shemitah in the 8th year after the Shemitah year, meaning at the beginning of the 8th year, this is when this all took place. And the first thing done was Eisin Loi Bima Shel Eitz Ba'azara. A wooden platform was made for the king in what's called Ba'azara. Azara means the courtyard. Now, which courtyard are we talking about? So here on the bottom, they bring down from Tosfos Yontif, this was the women's courtyard, not the main courtyard where the altar stood. You know that there was the Beis HaMikdash, call it the building itself, a courtyard around it, and that was called the Ezras Yisrael. And then you had the Azara, Ezras Nashim, it was called we call that the ladies section. It wasn't necessarily the ladies section, but that's what it was called. And this is where this bima, this wooden platform, was made. And it says, V'hu yoshev aleh, the king would sit on this platform. Shenemar, and how do we know this was the time when it took place? Because the Torah says, B'kei shav hashanim b'moyed, at the end of 7 years, during the festival, etc. Okay, so we now have the time when it's done. We have a little bit of the setting. Now, we're going to read something that we had similar to in the previous Mishnah when it came to the Kohen Gadol's reading, the high priest's reading on Yom Kippur. Now, don't forget, he's going to be reading from the Torah, similar to how the Kohen Gadol read from the Torah on Yom Kippur. So the Mishnah begins. The Mishnah continues. Chazan HaKnesses Noitel Sefer Torah. The Chazan HaKnesses, the attendant. The attendant of the shul took the Sefer Torah. The Nois LeRosh HaKnesses, and he gave it to the head of the shul. Now, what shul are we talking about here? So as we learned in the previous Mishnah, there was a shul next to the courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash. And that's where the Sefer Torah is going to read from was kept. And the Chazan HaKnesses, which we call the attendant of the shul, which we would call nowadays the shamus, the one who takes care of setting up things in the shul, he would take the Sefer Torah and give it to the head of the shul. Who's the head of the shul? The Gabbai. The one who gives out, who davens, who gets an aliyah. We call him the Gabbai. For Reish HaKnesses, the head of the shul, Neisel Eskan, we give it to the deputy Kohen Gadol. The Kohen Gadol, the Kohen who was set aside, who was designated to take over for the Kohen Gadol if he couldn't do the avodah, he couldn't do the service. Vaskan Neisel Kohen Gadol. The Skan, the deputy Kohen Gadol, gave it to the Kohen Gadol, to the high priest. The Kohen Gadol Neisel Melech, and the Kohen Gadol gave it to the king. So similar that we had all these people involved in the previous Mishnah, and the reason given for their involvement was it's a greater honor to the final person when more people are involved in what he's about to do. The same thing applies here for the king. And in this case, it was the added person to this line of things was the Kohen Gadol himself. Okay, now the Kohen Gadol nois lamelech. The Kohen Gadol gives it to the king. The Hamelech oimed umekabel, and the king stands, meaning everybody when a Sefer Torah is in motion, you're supposed to stand. So he stands umekabel and he receives. The Koire Yoshev, when he reads it sitting. That was unlike the Kohen Gadol who read it standing. And here on the bottom they bring down, although one who reads the Torah in public must stand, the king was allowed to sit because it does not befit his honor to stand. It's more honorable to the king to be sitting. That's how that befits his honor, and therefore he may sit while reading the Torah itself. Okay? Now, it says, V'karei Yoshev, and he reads it sitting. Agrifas Hamelech. There's a king whose name was Agrifas. He was the king when the second Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. So, Amar V'kibel, he stood up and he received the Torah, V'kara Oimed, and he decided to read it standing, like everybody else would. V'shebechu Chachamim, the Chachamim praised him. And on the bottom they explain that why did he read it standing? That was his way of showing honor to the Torah. And a king can forego his own honor for the sake of the Torah. That is what they bring. That's the explanation here. And the Chachamim praised him for it. So even though a king didn't have to do that, he could be sitting, he decided to stand in honor of the Torah. Okay, now, we're going to see, the Melech is going to read a lot of the book of Devarim. And when he came to the following verse that talks about a king, and the pasuk reads, you may not appoint over you a ish nachri, a person who is a stranger, meaning someone who is not considered Jewish is not allowed to be a king amongst the Jewish people. So therefore, when he came to that point where he said, or the way they translate the word ish nachri means appoint a foreign man over yourselves as king, and a foreign man would be someone who is not Jewish, Zogo ein of demois, he cried. His eyes, there were tears flowing from his eyes. Now, what was bothering him? Why did he cry? And the answer that's given is because this Agrifas was a descendant of the king Herod, Herdis. Herdis was a Canaanite slave who took the throne by force. Okay, which means that he really was not considered Jewish in the sense of being able to be king. All right. Now, Agrifas, when he read that, he saw himself as a descendant of Herdis, as someone who may not be king. So he cried. So on that, Omrulai, the sages said to him, Al tisyari Agrifas. Agrifas, don't be afraid. Don't be so concerned. Achinu ata, achinu ata, achinu ata. You are our brother, you are our brother, you are our brother. They were being very emphatic about the fact that he was their brother. Now, so why did he considered himself, he thought he was not considered appropriate to be, fitting to be the king. And they say, no, you are. What was the question here? And so the thing is like this. Although, they explain here, although Agrifas' father was descended from Herdis, from Herod, his mother was Jewish. You got a Jewish mother, you're Jewish. So even though he really had the status, I shouldn't say that. His father had the status of Eved Kanaani, of a non-Jewish slave. Nonetheless, his mother was Jewish, which made him Jewish. So they were trying to tell him, you're okay. Now on the bottom they bring down here the following. The people tried to reassure Agrifas by telling him that since his mother was Jewish, he was qualified to be king. This, however, was not true, because a person cannot become king unless both his mother and his father were born Jewish. So actually, they were wrong in telling him that he was okay. Because in order to, the Ish Nachri that we're talking about here has to be someone that is, Jewish from both sides. The king, Ish Nachri, is excluding someone who is not Jewish from both sides, and therefore, they were actually wrong in trying to tell him that he's okay. All right, we shall continue this next time. Have a wonderful day and a wonderful Yontif.
Maybe they were